In this video, I'm going to show you how to use several functions embedded inside of functions to solve a problem. The primary function will be the if function, but we'll also use the left function as well as the find function. So let's get started. What I have here in front of you is the data from the Titanic passenger list, or a partial list of Titanic passengers. And what we want to do is we want to take a look at the title for each of the passengers. And you can see here in front of you we have Mr. and Mrs. and Miss. But if you go down further, we have Master, which would be the title that they used for a child here. And if you scroll down a ways, you'll see some other titles as well. Here's a Don. And I don't know how many different titles there are. And so we want to figure that out. So I'm going to show you kind of step by step how we might solve this problem. The first thing I'm going to do is insert a new column here. And I'm going to call that column, let's call it the location column. And what I'm going to use is the find function to find the location of the space. So notice in each one of these titles, there's the title with a period followed by a space. And so I'm curious about where the location of that space is in the text. Now the text is C2. So it tells me the location of that text is in position number 4. Okay, so that's a good start. Now I'm going to copy that down, and I'm going to do that by going to this column so I can get to the bottom of the data. Oops, and go here and then go back up. Simply, it's just kind of a faster way of doing that. Again, I'm using the Control-Shift down arrow to get to the bottom of the data. But if you do that on an empty column, if you do Control-Shift and the down arrow on an empty column, you actually select all of the rows. And so I don't want to do that. So you can see that here. Okay, so we'll go back up. So I have the location. The location is in position 4. Now, why is that important? Well, because I need to know the location so I can use the left function to extract that title. Now, I'm showing you kind of the logical sequence of this. The fact is that when you're trying to solve a problem like this, you don't always go in a straight line like I'm showing you here. You might try something first, and that might partially work, and then you try something else, and eventually you land on a solution. So what I'm providing you is an easy, direct path to the solution without any serious hiccups along the way, which isn't normal, right? Even when I sat down to figure this out, to figure out what I was going to be demonstrating, it took me several iterations to decide, okay, this is the way I want to solve this problem. So I don't want to give the impression that this is straightforward and easy for anyone, including me. It takes time, and these formulas can be quite complex. So that's the location. So let's get the title now. And to get the title, we're going to use the left function, because I know that that returns the number of characters on the left-hand side of the string, and we have the number of characters right here, 4. So the string or the text that I want is in C2. And then the location I want is in D2. So I want it to go that number of characters, but I don't actually want it to go that number of characters, because remember, I told it to find the space, not the period. So the space is 1 position beyond what I want. So I'm actually going to subtract 1 from it, and that will give me the title, Mr. Now, if I didn't subtract 1 from it, it would still give me the title, Mr. It would look the same, but it would actually contain an extra space in there, and I don't want that. So I've subtracted a 1 from it. Now, as is the case with most things in Excel when you're solving a problem, there's many ways of doing this. I could have subtracted 1 from here, minus 1. Okay, that would have done the same thing. Notice that got rid of the period over here. I could also have looked for a period here and not subtracted the 1 here. So there's different ways of doing it. Now, I didn't look for the period here. I chose the solution of looking for a space because this has nearly 900 rows of data. I didn't look through all the data, and I wasn't sure if there would be a period after all of the titles, but I was pretty confident that there would be a space after the title. So I made a decision to go with the space, and I made a decision to put the -1 here. Again, multiple ways you can do that. Again, I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go to that column, Shift Control down. I'm going to click on the bottom one and go Shift Control up, and then Shift down, and that just gives me the columns I want, or the rows I want, I'm sorry. Whenever we're doing this type of analysis, we want to ensure we know what's in this attribute, in this field, in all of these cells as we look down. And fortunately, Excel makes it quite easy for us to explore this. If I simply select this entire column and go over here to the Insert tab and go to Recommended Charts, Excel will actually recommend something that creates a pivot table and a pivot chart for me. And you don't even need to know at this stage how to work with a pivot chart or pivot table, but you can see the results. So when I click OK here, Excel takes me to this page, sheet 3, that was generated, and shows all the titles that are available, their counts that are available, and then this pivot chart from that. And you can see on the right are options that you can adjust this pivot chart, which we're not interested in at this point, but we are interested in this from the standpoint of exploring what our data contains. So I'm going to engage in what's called category reduction. So these are categories: Mr., Mrs., Miss, Master, Don. You might have noticed there was a Reverend on here on the bottom, one of the last rows. So I'm going to add another row here, and I'm going to call this title category. And let's just expand that. And I'm going to use an if statement. Now this is going to get a little bit complex for us. So I want to walk through kind of the process that I'm doing. So the if statement, equal if, it tells me what it does. It works just like the count if that you saw in the previous demonstration, but instead of counting, it's just returning something. So I'm going to select that. Now, my logical test. Okay, so I want to know if the value in E2 equals something. So let's say if the value in E2 equals Mr., then I want it to display whatever's there in E2. Now, that seems trivial, but we're going to build on that. So that's if it is true. And if it's false, then let's have it display 0. Okay? This is for illustration purposes. So up here I can see the if statement. I can see that I have my value if true, that's E2 equals Mr., and value of true, I'm sorry, my logical test, didn't mean to confuse you, my logical test, E2 equals Mr., my value of true, E2, and my value of false, 0. And so here, if I copy this down, notice that it gives me zeros for these two, Mr. and Mrs. Okay. Well, I imagine there are quite a few Mr. and Mrs., Mrs. and Miss, sorry. So I want to include those as separate categories. So I want to modify this so that if the value is false, meaning it's not Mr., it does another check, so another if statement. So I'm going to include another if statement, hit the tab, and this time if E2 equals Mrs., then I want it to display E2. Otherwise, I want it to display 0. Now, I've embedded a function inside of a function, so I have to ensure I have enough parentheses here. Now notice that when I use the left arrow and the right arrow, it highlights very quickly the two opening and closing parentheses on there, and I'm missing a closing parentheses, and when I type that in, it matches it to that first one, so I have the right number, and I can hit enter, and it works. Now if I had the wrong number of parentheses, and I'd forgotten to put it in, it would give me a message that isn't that helpful, right? So I can just say, no, I don't want your help. Okay, I'll fix it myself, and I'll come up here and find what's wrong with it. Okay, so now when I drag it down, it will do the Mr. and the Miss. I'm sorry, the Mr. and the Misses, but not the Miss, because I haven't added that in yet. So let me go back up here. Now, if it's not Mr. and it's not Mrs., then let's check to see if it is E2 equals Miss. And if it is, I want it to display E2. Otherwise, now this is the category reduction possibility. So I'm just going to lump all those together in an other category. So the way this function reads is if it's Mr., it'll display Mr. If it's Mrs., it'll display Mrs. If it's Miss, it will display Miss. But if it's anything else, it'll simply display other. So I've reduced the number of categories that I have. So again, I've embedded a function inside of a function, so I can kind of use the back and forth arrows to see how many parentheses I'm missing. I'm missing one there, so I'll finish that out. It works, and when I drag it down, it works on all of those. And if I drag it down to the master, it should say other, and it does. So I'm going to copy that down. Control Shift up, and then Shift up to cover all of those. And now it's all copied there. So notice this Reverend is turned into an other, but all the others are left as they are. Okay, so now I have the title categories, and I've done some category reduction. Now, it's often good to build these types of things in different columns, but ultimately, you might not want all the extra columns as you're doing this on various things. So you might do this type of thing on multiple columns, meaning on this column of data and another column of data. So for example, age, you don't have to extract certain text from it, but you might group them, right? And you might use if statements to group them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine the statements that I have, the function that I have here in the column F, column E, and column D. And that gets fairly long, and it is prone to mistakes. So bear with me as I try to type this in. I'm going to call this my final version, for lack of a better name. And essentially, I'm using this same formula. So I'm going to copy it over, but note when I copy it over that this E2 is a relative reference, so it's going to move, and I'm going to have to change that. So I know that. I know what a relative reference, and even though it displays the correct answer, and this is a very good lesson, Excel can display the correct answer but have the wrong formula. This is the wrong formula because it's looking at F2, and it should be, at this point, looking at E2. And you just have to be aware of that. Sometimes you can get the right answer for a portion of your workbook, but as you expand things, as you copy things, go to some other position, you'll see all of a sudden it's not right. And that's because you can have the right answer with the wrong formula if you're not really careful. So what I want to do with this is I want to go back to the original row. I want to say C2 here. Oops, 2. I want it to look into C2. And I'm just going to leave that alone for a moment. I'm just going to change these. So I want to go to the original one. But when I do that, note that, well, I'm dealing with the whole thing. So now instead of just C2 equals Mr., what I have to do instead of that is I actually have to type in that find and that left. So I want to know if the left characters in C2 or in C2 that are up to the space. So my find, right? I want to find that space of C2, and I want to subtract 1 from that. So now I have that find in there. If that find equals Mr., then I want to display And I'm not going to make Excel work harder than it needs to here. I'm going to just go ahead and type in the Mr. I could repeat this left find, but every time Excel is executing this, it would be executing that left and that find twice if it equals Mr., right? Now, if it doesn't equal Mr., I'm going to have to repeat it over here. So I'm going to put the same thing in here. And this is dangerous typing all of these because it's easy to make mistakes. Find. And I'm looking for that space in C2. And I'm subtracting 1. And I'm saying if that equals misses, then I want to display misses. And then finally on this one, now instead of typing this in, I'm going to show you something. I can just come over here and grab it because it is the same. And in some ways, this is a little safer. Control C. So if that left, oops, I did it twice, so Control Z to undo that. Paste it twice. I didn't want to do that. Just wanted to paste it once. So now I have if the left C2 find the space of C2 in C2 minus 1 equals miss, then display. Now I have to change this to miss with a period because I want that period in there. And otherwise display other. Now if I've typed everything incorrectly, then it should work. That's a lot of typing. There's a lot of opportunity for errors here, so let's see. Well, it worked. And I can copy this down. Now, it's a complex formula, and by saying it worked, there's a little hesitance in me, but let's copy it down and see what happens here. Okay, it's displaying other like it should here. And let's now get rid of these 3 columns because we don't need them, and make sure it still works. Yes, my final works. So I am going to copy that down. Again, I'm going to use that column to, oops, I'm going to use that column, Shift Control down to get to the bottom row. I'm going to select my empty cell, Shift Control up, and Shift up, 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 up to just below my copied cell, hit Enter, and all of those are populated. So this would be my final version of this formula. Pretty complex formula to do something that seems simple. So simply because, or just because the task seems simple doesn't mean that the formula is going to be simple. So let's take this one step further. We've used the count function, so let's do some counts. So we can do a count of Mr., a count of Mrs., a count of Miss, and a count of other. So I can use equals count if. I can do my range, would be this, the data in the final column. And the details would be Mr. Let's do it, let's see. My value was in K4, so I want to point to where the value was. So this points to that Mr. So if I were to change this, it would change the value that's here, right? So I'm going to leave it. Of course, there are none like that because I mistyped it. 513. Now I'm going to copy this down. So I'm going to make these absolute references to the rows because I don't want the rows changing. But I do want that K4 to change, the row. I want it to change to 5 and 6 and 7. So we'll copy this down and we should get our numbers. There we go. We have numbers for all of these. So then what I can do is produce a visualization. So I'm going to select all of these. I'm going to go up here to Insert. I'm going to insert, and typically Excel does a good job recommending your visualization, your charts and graphs. So I'm going to look at the recommendation, and this is really what I'm looking for. So although you could use a pie chart, you could do something else. I tend to prefer these clustered column charts. And so now notice there, I just accidentally changed the, when I was trying to move the chart, I accidentally changed the data that was feeding the chart, and notice it changes, right? So that's a shortcut to adjusting what's visible in your chart. And I want to ensure it includes all of those. So I've adjusted that to include all of those. I can change the title here. So this would be my title categories. Category these. And then the other thing I notice about this chart is I don't like the fact that they're not in decreasing order. It makes some sense to have Mr. and Mrs. next to one another when I type this in, but I think visually it's more appealing if we can see, well, what's the most common, what's the next most common. So I can come up here to this data and I can go to my data tab and I can sort this, select the sort, and I want to sort it by column L, which is my count. And I want to sort it not smallest to largest, I want it largest to smallest. And when I say OK, it puts Miss second, Mrs. third, and then that's a nice visually appealing chart that I can take a look at. Okay, that's a lot. It's a complex formula. It's worth giving a try and see if you can do it.